The metallic tang of the cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clean, a familiar bite that always made my eyes water just a little. The hum of the Zamboni vibrated through the concrete floor, a low, steady drone that usually meant the season was about to begin, but not this year. Not yet. I was alone, the only one here, sitting on the cold bleachers in the otherwise empty ice rink. Zamboni running. Season hasn't started. The machine rumbled past, a lone driver atop it, scraping and polishing the ice to a perfect, glassy sheen. Steam rose from the fresh surface, ghost-like in the dim, artificial light. My breath plumed in front of me, a fleeting cloud of existence. I watched it dissipate, much like everything else had lately. My colleague had tried to talk to me, had offered empty platitudes about moving on, but what did they know of the hollow ache that had become my constant companion? Grief was a heavy coat, thick and suffocating, and I had worn it for so long, I wasn't sure I remembered how to take it off. I tasted the lingering bitterness of coffee on my tongue, though I hadn't had a cup in hours. It was just another ghost. The Zamboni completed its final pass, the hum fading to a gentle thrum as its engine cut out. It pressed like cotton in my ears, amplifying the quiet thud of my own pulse against my ribs. The ice stretched before me, an endless, flawless mirror reflecting the yellowed fluorescent bulbs overhead. A letter had arrived 2 days ago, plain envelope, heavy stock, from a solicitor I'd never heard of. It spoke of an ancestral property and a distant relative I didn't know I had, an inheritance, a house. Remote, decaying, forgotten. The words had shimmered with possibility in the gloom of my apartment. A fresh start. A place where the echoes of my past might not reverberate so loudly. I'd called the solicitor, a brisk, no-nonsense voice on the other end, confirming the details, arranging the transfer. It felt unreal, a sudden, sharp turn in a road I thought would only ever lead straight into more grey. The drive took longer than I anticipated. Hours melted into a blur of highway, and then increasingly narrow, winding roads. My phone's signal died somewhere around a sign that simply read, "Unmaintained road ahead." The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a raw, wild smell that prickled my skin. I passed fewer and fewer cars, then none at all. The isolation settled over me, not unwelcome, but a little daunting. The rumble of my old car's engine became the only sound for miles. The sun was a bruised purple stain on the horizon when I finally saw it. Not a sign, not a mailbox, just a break in the trees, a long, rutted track that angled sharply off the main road. My headlights cut through the encroaching dusk, illuminating gnarled branches that clawed at the sky. The track was overgrown, grass pushing through cracked asphalt, gravel crunching loudly under my tires. I drove slowly, my grip tight on the steering wheel, a sense of unease starting to coil in my stomach. This wasn't just remote, it was forgotten. And then the house appeared, a silhouette against the fading light. 2 stories, maybe 3, with a steeply pitched roof that seemed to sag in places. Windows, black and empty like vacant eyes, stared out from under heavy, moss-covered eaves. Twisted, skeletal trees formed a ragged, untamed garden around it, their branches scratching against the gloom. No lights, no sign of life. Just the house, looming, silent. I parked the car in front of what must have once been a grand entrance, now just a crumbling porch with steps choked by weeds. It wasn't unpleasant enough to be alarming, but it was wrong. My skin prickled, aware. The front door was solid oak, scarred and faded, its paint long since peeled away. I pushed it open. The air was heavy, tasting of something I couldn't quite place, something that made my throat feel tight. Not yet. I was alone, the vast expanse of ice, a shimmering, empty canvas under the stark, fluorescent lights of the ice rink, Zamboni running. Season hasn't started. The solitude here had been a comfort, a cold, hard truth I could understand. It was predictable. But the papers, the lawyer's voice, The keys heavy in my pocket, they pulled me away from this sterile, known world towards something entirely unknown. I wiped a stray tear, not from the cold, but from the quiet finality of leaving. The drive stretched for hours, the city receding into a hazy memory in my rearview mirror. Roads narrowed, asphalt giving way to gravel, then to little more than twin ruts carved through overgrown fields. The landscape grew wilder, trees crowding the edges of the dirt track, their branches clawing at the sky. The air, once sharp, grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal perfume that clung to everything. I felt a growing sense of isolation, an art tightening in my stomach, as if I was driving not just away from civilization, but away from everything familiar. Finally, the trees parted, revealing a rusted, wrought-iron gate half swallowed by ivy. Beyond it, a long, winding driveway choked with weeds led to the house. It wasn't just old, it was ancient, the stone walls mottled with lichen, the slate roof sagging in places. It seemed to breathe, a silent, heavy exhalation. I wrestled with the gate, the rusted hinges groaning a mournful protest that echoed through the stillness. The cold metal bit into my palm. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked up the long drive, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the only sound the frantic thud of my own pulse against my ribs. The garden was a tangle of wild roses and thorny bushes, reclaiming the pathways, obscuring what might have once been manicured lawns. A faint, sweet decay hung in the air, a mix of rotting wood and something else, something vaguely metallic, like old blood. Was I truly alone here? The key, surprisingly, turned with a soft click, a sound swallowed instantly by the vastness beyond. I pushed the door open, its protesting creak grating on my ears, and stepped inside. Dust sheets draped over what I assumed were antique furniture pieces, creating ghostly, silent forms in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. The air was heavy, almost viscous, pressing like cotton in my ears. My breath plumed in front of me. I ran a hand over a nearby wall. The plaster was cool and gritty, flaking slightly. A floorboard groaned somewhere above me, a long, drawn-out sigh. I paused, listening intently. The house was settling, I told myself, just an old house settling. I moved deeper into the hall, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the bare wooden floor. Each step felt like an intrusion. To my left, a vast living room, equally shrouded, stretched out. My head snapped around, but there was nothing, only the static patterns of dust motes dancing in a single shaft of weak sunlight. My mind played tricks in the dimness, I decided. A faint, cloying sweetness, like withered flowers left too long, drifted past me, then vanished as quickly as it came. I sniffed, trying to locate its source, but the air was once again just stale and dusty. My imagination was running wild. This place was just old, neglected. It felt too big, too empty. I needed to pick a room, unpack, establish myself. A low, persistent scratching, almost imperceptible at first, seemed to emanate from somewhere upstairs, just beyond the reach of the faint light. Was it merely the wind, or something else entirely? Not yet. I was alone, the vast expanse of ice stretching out under the dim, yellowed arena lights, reflecting the empty stands like a frozen, inverted sky. The chill sank into my bones, a comforting, familiar cold that had always been my escape. Here, the world made sense. Here, the grief that had followed me like a shadow since the accident felt momentarily distant, replaced by the ghost of skates carving perfect arcs. I leaned against the plexiglass, my breath misting. The ice resurfacer, driven by a colleague whose shift I'd taken, rumbled its way around the perimeter, a slow, methodical beast. Its engine coughed once, a wet, guttural sound that seemed too organic for machinery, then settled back into its monotonous thrum. I watched the driver, a distant, bundled figure, turn the corner, the Zamboni's headlights cutting through the artificial fog it created. I blinked, but it was gone, absorbed back into the general gloom. This place always had tricky lighting. I stayed until the ice was perfect, until the colleague parked the Zamboni and gave me a tired nod before heading out. It felt watchful. I pulled my jacket tighter, the fabric rough against my skin. There was nothing here. Just me, the ice, the empty stands. Right. The drive back to the house was long, the winding country road swallowed by a premature dusk. The trees, skeletal branches reaching like grasping fingers, seemed to press closer to the asphalt with every mile. The setting sun bled an ominous purple and orange across the horizon, painting the isolated landscape in hues of bruised flesh. I gripped the steering wheel, grip tight. It had been less than a week, but already it felt less like a fresh start and more like a heavy cloak settling over my shoulders. I parked the truck and killed the engine. The air here was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, a stark contrast to the clean, sharp air of the rink. The front door, a massive slab of oak, groaned on its hinges as I pushed it open. I moved through the echoing foyer, my footsteps loud on the dusty floorboards. I fumbled for the light switch, the old wiring protesting with a faint buzz before the single overhead bulb flickered to life, casting the hallway in sickly yellow intervals. As I walked towards the kitchen, a quick movement caught my eye. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I stopped dead, straining my ears. Nothing, just the settling groans of the old house, the creak of ancient timbers. "It's just the light," I muttered, my voice thin and reedy in the vast space, the old house playing tricks. I tried to rationalize it, to blame the fatigue, the residual grief, anything but what my instincts screamed. Faint, they drifted from the floor above, soft as a sigh, barely audible over the clatter of my plate. It wasn't distinct words, more like a breathy murmur, a low, intimate conversation just beyond my grasp. My hand froze, the sandwich half raised. The sound was too ethereal, too delicate to be the wind, too regular. It ebbed and flowed like someone speaking in hushed tones. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking a little. Instantly, I waited, heart thumping. The smell of dust and something else, something vaguely metallic, seemed to cling to the air here, or the wind. I tried to convince myself, to force logic into the unsettling reality. I went back to the kitchen, abandoning my dinner. Sleep felt like a distant, impossible luxury. I decided to unpack some of the boxes I'd brought, to create some semblance of order in the chaos. I found a box marked living room decor. Inside, nestled amongst old newspapers, was a small porcelain figurine of a shepherdess, delicate and chipped. I remembered seeing it on the mantelpiece in the living room when I first arrived, next to an empty, tarnished silver frame. I had specifically moved it, placed it on a side table to make room for a new photo of my parents I wanted to display. I was certain of it. I had placed it there carefully to avoid breaking it. The shepherdess figurine was back on the mantelpiece. Not just back, but nestled perfectly in the exact spot it had occupied before. My breath hitched. Ice flooded my veins. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't my imagination. Someone or something had been here. It knew I had moved the figurine. It knew I had turned the frame. Why would it put them back? Why would it want me to know? The air grew heavy, thick and still. What was happening in this house? What did it want? The boxes, still taped shut, marked me from the living room floor. My dinner sat abandoned in the kitchen, a cold, unappetizing monument to my unraveling composure. Sleep was a foreign concept, a luxury I couldn't afford when every creak of the old house felt like a whisper in my ear. I tried to convince myself that unpacking, arranging my few belongings would ground me, make this alien place feel more like home. I reached for the nearest box, my fingers brushing against the rough cardboard. That's when it hit me. A sudden, sharp drop in temperature, like walking into a freezer on a summer's day. It wasn't just a draft. The air itself felt heavy, dense with an unnatural chill that made my breath cloud. There was nothing. The house stood silent, save for the low groan of the old timbers settling. a sound that suddenly felt menacing, not comforting. I pulled my hands back, rubbing my arms, trying to generate warmth. It radiated outward, a palpable presence that defied all logic, all rational explanation. My throat tightened, a metallic fear coating my tongue. This wasn't the house settling. This wasn't a draft. What impassable thing was here, in the very air I breathed? The temperature in the rest of the room felt relatively normal, a stark contrast to the pocket of Arctic air that hung suspended. Then a faint sound, like dry leaves skittering across a wooden floor, echoed from the hallway. It was too light to be footsteps, too deliberate to be the wind. My head snapped towards the sound, straining my ears, but it ceased as quickly as it began. Then came the smell. Faint at first, a damp, earthy scent like disturbed soil or old, wet stone. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it grew, tinged with something else, something acrid like burnt sugar or perhaps rust. It clung to the air, making my stomach clench with nausea. Every nerve ending felt raw, exposed. The house, which I had hoped would be a refuge, was actively rejecting me, actively sensing me. There was the house truly empty, or was something else here, hiding in plain sight? I couldn't sleep. I needed answers. This wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical assault on my senses. I remembered the old study, packed with dusty books and ancient documents I'd barely glanced at during my initial walkthrough. It was a desperate hope, a fragile thread to cling to in the face of the inexplicable. I grabbed a flashlight, its beam a weak defiance against the encroaching gloom, and headed towards the back of the house. The study door groaned as I pushed it open, kicking up a cloud of fine, gray dust that made me cough. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of decaying paper and dry wood. Cobwebs, thick and laden with the dust of decades, draped from the ceiling like forgotten shrouds. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating towering shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes, their titles faded and unreadable. This wasn't a quick search. This was an archaeological dig. My resolve hardened. I would find something. Anything. What secrets did these old papers hold about the house? I started systematically, pulling down books, blowing dust from their covers, flipping through brittle pages. Most were dry legal texts, theological treatises, or forgotten poetry. My fingers, gritty with dust, traced the spines of countless forgotten histories. The hours blurred, the only sound the rustle of paper and my own shallow breathing. The season hadn't started, but the lights were on, casting a brilliant sheen on the untouched ice. I remembered the weight of skates in my hands, the promise of speed and freedom. It was a memory, sharp and clear, from a time before the losses, before the grief that now felt like a permanent fixture in my chest. Why now? Why here? The thought vanished as quickly as it came, leaving behind a profound sense of loss, a fresh wave of loneliness. My hand brushed against a hidden compartment behind a loose panel on one of the shelves. Inside, not a book, but a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age. It looked different from the other documents, more personal, more immediate. As I pulled it out, a gust of frigid air swept through the room, making the pages of an open book on a nearby desk flutter violently. A low, guttural moan seemed to rise from the floorboards beneath my feet, a sound that was too deep, too ancient, to be merely the house. What disturbing reference or name would this discovery reveal? My fingers trembled as I opened the journal. The ink was faded, the script elegant but difficult to decipher in the dim light. It was dated almost a century ago. Then I found it, a series of entries, increasingly frantic, detailing the slow disappearance of objects, the strange, echoing laughter from empty rooms. Finally, the mention of the hunger. The journal abruptly ended mid-sentence on a ripped page, the last visible words describing a growing lassitude, a pervasive weariness that stole the will to move, to speak. My breath hitched. Weariness. The sound crawled under my skin, raising every hair on my body. I wanted to run. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead. What did this discovery imply about the house's past and its current insatiable inhabitant? I tried to confront the unease, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The air itself felt heavy, thick with unspoken histories. I needed answers, not just endless, baseless fear. My determination, a fragile thing these days, pushed me towards the stacks of dusty cardboard. The air around them smelled of damp earth and forgotten paper, a scent that prickled my nose and sank into my lungs. My fingers, still trembling from the previous night's phantom sounds, hesitated at the first flap. What would I find in these sealed tombs? Would they offer clarity, or merely deepen the shadows already encroaching on my mind? I tore into the first box with a sudden, almost violent energy. Inside, a chaotic jumble of old newspapers, brittle photographs, and a collection of leather-bound journals. The newspapers were from various decades, their headlines faded, their pages yellowed and fragile to the touch. Nothing immediately jumped out, just local news, births, deaths, the mundane tapestry of lives long past. But then, beneath a pile of loose letters, I found it. A series of articles from the early 1900s, all centered around this property. The first article, dated 1907, reported the disappearance of a young woman, the daughter of the family who owned the house then. No trace, no explanation, just a blank space where a life used to be. The paper felt like tissue in my grip, threatening to tear with the slightest pressure. The subsequent articles spoke of the family's growing despair, the father's descent into a melancholic madness, as one reporter delicately put it. I moved on, my fingers brushing against the rough, aged paper of another journal. This one belonged to a different occupant from the 1950s. The script was tight, almost frantic, filling every available space. The entries started innocently enough, observations about the changing seasons, the solitude. Then the tone shifted. "The quiet is not empty," one entry read. "It is full of listening." Another, weeks later. The last entry was just a single, sprawling word, scrawled so hard it almost ripped the page. Empty. What had they become empty of? The hours bled into each other as I unearthed more fragments. A hastily written letter from a relative, begging an occupant to leave, warning of the house's grip. A brief police report detailing another inexplicable fall from a window, no foul play suspected. Each discovery was a fresh puncture, letting out a little more of my own composure. The pattern was undeniable. Despair, isolation, madness, disappearance, death. It wasn't just a house. It was a hungry, waiting thing, and I was living right inside its jaws. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache behind my eyes. The dust from the boxes had dried my throat, leaving a metallic taste in my mouth, like old blood. I slumped onto the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of paper, and without meaning to, I drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep. The air was sharp, biting, smelling of ozone and faint exhaust fumes. I was standing on the rough concrete edge of an ice rink, Zamboni running. Season hasn't started. The vast sheet of ice stretched out, an unbroken, pristine white, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. The Zamboni, a monstrous, boxy machine, rumbled slowly across the far end, its engine a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floor and up my legs. I was alone. Utterly, terribly alone. No spectators, no skaters, just the metallic tang of the cold air and the oppressive hum of the machine. It scraped the ice, a sound that grated against my teeth, leaving a fresh, undisturbed surface in its wake. But as it turned, its heavy treads left faint, almost imperceptible grooves in the ice, like tracks leading into nothing. It had no defined shape, just a spreading stain on the pristine white. The hum of the Zamboni deepened, a low thrum that burrowed into my bones. I jolted awake, a strangled gasp tearing from my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The taste of metallic fear coated my tongue. It felt less like a dream and more like a memory implanted, a seed of doubt taking root. Had I truly been sleeping, or had something else been reaching for me, even in the depths of my unconsciousness? My eyes burned. They felt gritty, like sand had been rubbed into them, a physical manifestation of the mental exhaustion pressing down on me. The boxes, still taped shut, marked me from the living room floor, each one a sealed testament to a life I was failing to unpack, a past I couldn't escape. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, the settling of ancient timber, but the conviction felt hollow, fragile. The air in the house was heavy, a thick, cloying blanket that seemed to absorb all sound, all light. It smelled like dust and something else, something vaguely metallic, like old coins left out in the rain, or perhaps something more sinister. My skin prickled, a constant, low thrum of unease beneath the surface. I knew it wasn't just the house, it was it. It was closer now, not just an echo, but a presence pressing against the edges of my perception. I had to fight, not just hide, not just endure. I had to push back against whatever was trying to consume me. I tried to ground myself. I closed my eyes, picturing a memory, a good one. My cousin, laughing, a spray of ice crystals rising around her skates. We were at the local ice rink. The season hadn't even officially started, but we'd snuck in, just for a few stolen moments on the fresh ice. The smell of ozone and clean ice filled my head. I heard the low, steady hum of the Zamboni in the background, a comforting drone as it smoothed the surface, preparing for the season. It was a perfect memory, crisp and clear. Then the hum changed. It grew deeper, coarser, like grinding stone. The smell of ice morphed into something acrid, a chemical tang that made my stomach clench. I opened my eyes in my mind, but the image was wrong. The Zamboni, still humming, was no longer smoothing. I tried to call out to reach for her, but my voice was trapped in my throat, and my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. This wasn't my memory. This was a violation. The metallic taste of fear coated my tongue. It was attacking my mind, twisting the very fabric of my past. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs wobbly. I needed to move, to find something real, something solid. I walked into the hallway, running my hand along the familiar wallpaper, the floral pattern faded and peeling. It was real. It was tangible. But as my fingers traced a loose seam, the pattern seemed to ripple. They became tiny, grasping hands, reaching out from the wall. I snatched my hand back, a strangled sound escaping my lips. My heart leaped into my throat. I stared, my eyes wide, but the paper was just paper again, the roses faded, inert. Had I imagined it? The doubt was a poison seeping into my thoughts. I stumbled into the study, a room I'd spent hours in, trying to make sense of the house's history. The towering bookshelves, crammed with ancient, leather-bound tomes, should have been a comfort, a symbol of permanence. But the light from the single window seemed to dim and brighten independently of the outside world, casting the room in sickly green intervals. A book, one I distinctly remembered leaving flat on the desk, now stood upright, its spine facing away from me. As I reached for it, the book vanished, replaced by an empty patch of dust. I blinked. It was back. But now it was open, face down, and a single, dried leaf lay pressed between its pages. I hadn't seen any leaves in here before. My teeth chattered, a frantic rhythm against the rising panic. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a symphony of barely audible malice. My head throbbed, a dull ache that resonated with every beat of my frantic pulse. I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to steady myself, to clear the fog that was rapidly obscuring my thoughts. Was I going insane? Was this the entity's goal? To make me question everything, until I was just a shell, an empty vessel for its malevolent presence. I had to resist. But how do I resist something that is already inside my head? My eyes burned. But a new resolve, cold and sharp, had begun to cut through the haze of grief. I was determined to understand what was happening to me, to this house, to find some anchor in the swirling chaos. I couldn't just let it consume me. The oppressive weight of the house felt heavier than usual that afternoon. It pressed in, a silent, demanding presence. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the old wood felt like a whisper in my ear. I needed to get out. I needed clear air, a place untainted by the house's suffocating influence, if such a place still existed for me. The drive was a blur of autumn colors, trees blazing red and gold against a sky that felt too vast, too indifferent. My hands gripped the steering wheel, grip tight. My pulse hammered against my ribs, frantic rhythm against the quiet hum of the engine. I wasn't sure where I was going, just that it had to be somewhere public, somewhere with other people, a place that anchored me to a reality that wasn't dissolving around me. I kept driving until I saw the familiar, faded sign. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot of the local ice rink, Zamboni running. Season hasn't started. The building itself was a low, wide structure of corrugated metal, painted a faded blue, looked lonely, waiting. Inside, the vast space felt even emptier. The stands were deserted, a sea of plastic seats stretching up into the dimness. My breath plumed in the cold air. The low thrum of the Zamboni echoed, a mechanical beast slowly gliding across the pristine ice, leaving a slick, smooth sheen in its wake. The headlights of the machine cut through the gloom, reflecting off the ice in long, distorted streaks. I walked to the plexiglass barrier, resting my forearms on the cool, smooth plastic. I watched the Zamboni, its driver a solitary figure encased in the machine's cabin. He looked utterly focused, oblivious to the empty space to me. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, the kind that comes from watching a repetitive, simple task. It was a momentary reprieve, a feeling of being watched. Only the reflections of the Zamboni's lights on the ice, stretching endlessly. A sound, faint at first, then clearer, drifted across the rink. It was a voice, not the Zamboni driver's. It was too soft, too melodic. It sounded like a woman singing, a lullaby. My stomach clenched. There was no one else here. I strained my ears, my heart beginning to pick up its frantic pace again. It wasn't singing anymore. My mother's voice. Ice flooded my veins. You don't have to be alone, my boy. I stumbled back from the barrier, my hand flying to my mouth, stifling a gasp. My mother was gone. He had been gone for years. This couldn't be real. My eyes darted around, searching for a speaker, a trick, anything to explain it. There was nothing. The Zamboni continued its slow, mechanical dance, its driver still oblivious. We can be together again. The voice crooned closer now, seeming to emanate from the very air around me. All the pain, all the loneliness, it can end. Just let me in. Let me show you the way. A vision flickered across the ice, a shimmering, translucent image of a woman, her back to me, skating gracefully. Her movements were fluid, effortless, and her hair, the exact shade of my mother's, flowed behind her. She turned her head slightly, and I saw a profile that was almost hers, almost perfect. A wave of nausea twisted through me. This wasn't comfort. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the image, the voice, the insidious invitation. I tried to pull out my phone to call someone, anyone. My fingers fumbled, slick with sweat, dropping the device. It clattered against the concrete, the screen cracking. The voice chuckled, a dry, rustling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. No one can help you now, Seth. You are mine. The figure on the ice paused, then slowly, gracefully, turned fully to face me. The face was not my mother's. The eyes were hers, filled with an impossible, yearning sadness that was utterly devastating, and they were fixed on me. I finally broke free, scrambling backward, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I turned and ran, not caring where, just away from that voice, that invitation, that impossible, terrible promise. The cold air burned in my lungs. I burst out of the rink doors, the sound of the Zamboni's hum fading behind me, replaced by the pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert them into the ignition. I started the engine, threw the car into reverse, and sped out of the parking lot. But the image of those eyes, filled with a grief that mirrored my own, burned behind my eyelids. What did it want from me? My breath hitched, a ragged sound that vanished into the vast, cold expanse of the ice rink. Zamboni running, season hasn't started. The machine hummed on, oblivious, a slow, metallic beetle tracing perfect lines across the ice. My mother. Gone, just like that. The image had evaporated, leaving behind only the polished surface and the echo of my own disbelief. I stumbled back, my hand still pressed to my mouth, a futile attempt to silence the tremor that had seized me. Fluorescent lights, high above, cast a sickly, yellowish glow that did little to warm the cavernous space. The air itself was a frigid presence, a damp, metallic tang of ozone and old ice clinging to my tongue. I searched for a speaker, a projector, a hidden screen, anything to explain the impossible trick my mind had played. But there was nothing. This wasn't grief, not just grief. This was something else. My gaze locked onto the Zamboni as it completed its pass over the exact spot where my mother had stood, her eyes wide, her lips parted in a silent, pleading word. The machine's brushes whirred, the blade scraping, and fresh ice rolled out behind it, smooth and pristine. It wasn't dirt. It was a deep, ink-eye stain, spreading from the center of the fresh ice, seeping outwards like spilled oil. My stomach twisted. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The stain grew not randomly, but with purpose, its tendrils elongating, intertwining. The Zamboni continued its slow, indifferent circuit, its hummer marking lullaby as the horror solidified before my eyes. I recognized it. It was the same symbol, the same twisted, interlocking spirals I had seen etched into the floorboards of the ancestral home, hidden beneath a loose rug. The same mark I'd dismissed as old, meaningless ornamentation. I was alone, standing at the center of a vast, frozen canvas, adorned with an impassable, malevolent inscription. This wasn't a trick of light. This wasn't a hallucination born of sorrow. This was real. The entity wasn't just in the house. It was here, in this empty rink, using the very fabric of my reality as its canvas. My mental defenses, already brittle, shattered. I felt exposed, vulnerable. There was no escape. My breath came in shallow, desperate gasps. I wanted to run, but my legs felt weighted, rooted to the spot. My mother. Gone, just like that. The image had evaporated, leaving behind a profound chill that had nothing to do with the freezing air. The smell of ozone and damp concrete hung heavy, a sterile counterpoint to the chaos in my mind. Why had I come here? To escape the house, yes, but the house followed. It twisted my thoughts, warped my reality. I pressed my palms against the cold glass barrier separating the bleachers from the rink, the chill seeping through my skin, a grounding sensation, yet the tremor in my hands wouldn't stop. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the entity had simply allowed me this brief respite, knowing I would return. The truth, it wasn't just in the house. It was of the house. I had to understand. I had to know what I was fighting, what was consuming me. My mind raced, piecing together fragments, the old photographs, the feeling of eyes watching, the strange sense of being chosen. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my gut that the answer lay hidden, not in plain sight, but in some forgotten corner, some overlooked detail within the ancestral walls. The house loomed, a gaunt silhouette against the fading twilight, its windows like vacant eyes. The air immediately felt heavier, thicker, as if I'd stepped into another dimension. A metallic taste coated my tongue, the familiar tang of fear. The front door groaned open, a drawn-out sigh, and the interior swallowed me whole. The scent of dust and decay, mingled with something acrid and sweet, assaulted my nose. I moved through the familiar, yet newly menacing, hallways, my gaze sweeping over every detail, searching for an anomaly, a crack in the facade. The old study, the heavy oak desk, the towering, dust-laden bookshelves, the unlit fireplace. I ran my hand over the spines of ancient, leather-bound books, The dry, brittle texture a ghostly caress. Most were histories, forgotten philosophies, works on local folklore. My fingers snagged on a volume tucked deep behind a row of larger tomes, its spine plain, unadorned. It wasn't a book at all. I pulled it free, a cloud of fine dust erupting around it. My fingers fumbled with the clasp, a rusted buckle that finally gave way with a soft click. Inside, the pages were brittle, yellowed, filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. It wasn't a journal, not exactly. It was a record of observations. My own family name, generations removed. The entry spoke of a great hunger that settled upon the land, drawn to the cracks in the spirit, the sorrow of the isolated. It described how the entity, nameless in the ledger, fed on grief, on loneliness, on the crushing weight of despair. It wasn't a ghost, not in the traditional sense. It was something older, something elemental, a parasitic consciousness that had found a perfect host in this isolated house, a magnet for the broken-hearted. It twisted perceptions, amplified sorrow, made solid ground feel like quicksand. Its goal wasn't just to kill, but to consume the essence of its victims, to grow stronger, to perpetuate its own agonizing existence. It shows them faces of regret. It feeds on the echo of their pain. My eyes scanned further, my throat tight, a knot of nausea twisting through me. The ledger described a slow, insidious process. First, the isolation, then the grief, then the blurring of reality, the visions, the despair. Finally, the complete absorption, the body left behind, an empty shell, while the mind, the spirit, became part of the entity's growing consciousness, another voice in its endless, hungry chorus in the house. It wasn't just a dwelling. It was its anchor, its primary tool. The very structure amplified the entity's power, drawing in new victims, holding them captive in its web of sorrow. The house breathed with it, lived through it. It was a living trap. The final entry, written in a shaky hand, was a desperate warning. It knows when I see it. It knows when I understand. The knowledge makes I more palatable. It strengthens the connection. Do not seek the truth, for the truth is its greatest weapon. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the ledger. The words blurred, but their meaning was burned into my mind. I had sought the truth, and now I knew. A faint, almost imperceptible hum started, low and resonant, vibrating through the floorboards, through the very air. It was a sound I hadn't noticed before, but now that I had the context, it felt like a hungry purr. The entity wasn't just in the house, it was the house, and now it knew I understood. What would it do now that its game was exposed? The hum resonated. It wasn't just in the room anymore, but deep in my bones, a low, guttural vibration that made my teeth ache. The ledger, heavy and cold, slipped from my grasp, thudding onto the dusty floorboards. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, the cold pressing in, a physical weight on my chest. I knew. I finally understood the insidious nature of this place, the entity that had been feeding on my grief, my loneliness. It wasn't a ghost, not a spirit. It was something older, something that consumed. And it knew I knew. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the hallway, a floorboard or something else. I had to get out. My legs felt like lead, but a surge of defiant adrenaline propelled me forward. I wouldn't be another name in that ledger, another forgotten victim. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something acrid, like burnt metal. I pushed through the library door, my hands scraping against the rough wood, splinters digging into my palm. The hallway stretched, impassably long, the familiar wallpaper rippling as if seen through heat haze. Every step I took felt like wading through treacle. The hum intensified, a thrumming against my eardrums that threatened to split my head open. I reached the main staircase, hand grasping the banister. The wood felt strangely soft, almost spongy, yielding beneath my fingers. I started down, each creak of the ancient steps a mocking laugh. Halfway down, the air shifted, tasting of ozone and something vaguely chemical, like cleaning fluid. Where was this coming from? The house was twisting, turning in on itself, anticipating my every move. It was guiding me. My feet hit the ground floor. The front door, my escape, was now gone. In its place, a long, narrow corridor I'd never seen before, faintly lit by a pulsing blue-white light. The hum was a roaring now, the vibration shaking the very floor beneath me. I had to follow. There was no other way. This wasn't an escape route. It was a path laid out for me. The corridor opened into a vast, cavernous space. The blue-white light originated from rows of overhead fluorescent bulbs, casting the scene in a sickly, ethereal glow. My breath hitched. I was in an ice rink, Zamboni running. Season hasn't started. The sheer, smooth expanse of ice dominated the cavern, reflecting the harsh lights into an endless, distorted mirror. Empty plastic seats, stacked neatly in the stands, gleamed with a desolate sheen. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, and the sharp scent of ice mixed with the faint, gassy smell of petroleum from the Zamboni. It moved slowly, methodically, a hulking orange beast gliding across the ice, its engine a low, grinding growl that blended with the hum already in my head. This wasn't an escape. This was a stage. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the Zamboni's steady drone. The entity had led me here, but why? Then I saw it. Not on the ice, but in it. Beneath the pristine, newly smoothed surface, faint lines wavered, not cracks, but images, faces, distorted, elongated, trapped. I leaned closer, my forehead pressing against the freezing railing. They were all young, their eyes wide with a desperate plea. And among them, a face I recognized from the ledger, a name I now knew. The predecessor, the one who had also tried to fight back, who had documented the entity's history. The Zamboni circled closer now, its blades scraping against the ice with a sound that sent electricity racing up my back. The faces below the surface seemed to writhe, their expressions twisting into silent screams. This wasn't just ice. It was a frozen tableau, a gallery of its victims. And the Zamboni wasn't just smoothing the ice. It was erasing the evidence, preparing the canvas for the next for me. Nausea twisted through me. The hum reached a crescendo, vibrating through the concrete floor, up the railing into my very bones. The air grew heavy, thick, almost viscous. My vision swam. I felt my legs weaken. The entity wasn't just feeding on my grief. It was trying to preserve it, to freeze me in this state of despair, like those faces beneath the ice. This wasn't just a trap for my body. It was a trap for my spirit, a way to keep me perpetually reliving my losses, to make me a permanent fixture in its gallery of despair. The Zamboni hummed, drawing closer still. Was this what they had seen just before their own minds became part of the ice? The cold. It wasn't just a temperature anymore. It was a weight, pressing down, a physical wall that sealed the room, sealing me within it. My breath hitched, a ragged, useless sound. The hum vibrated through my teeth, rattling the very bones in my jaw, making my vision blur at the edges. I was on the floor, the rough wood splintering against my cheek, the fallen ledger a dark, heavy shape beside my outstretched hand. My fingers twitched, trying to grasp it, but my muscles felt like sodden rope. It wasn't the kind of numbness that dulled pain. It was the kind that suggested absence, a slow erasure. My thoughts, usually a chaotic jumble, began to thin, stretching like taffy until they snapped. Panic clawed at my throat, but the sound it made was trapped, a silent scream. What was happening to me? Was this it? Then the floor beneath me wasn't wood. The air, heavy with dust and decay, sharpened, tasting metallic and clean like winter. My eyes, still struggling to focus, registered the glint of polished ice, reflecting the pale, diffused light from overhead fixtures. A low rumble vibrated through the floor, a rhythmic, powerful thrum that was distinct from the entity's hum, yet somehow intertwined with it. I was no longer in the decaying house. I was in an ice rink, Zamboni running. Season hasn't started. My breath plumed white, a stark contrast to the sterile, almost pristine environment. The Zamboni moved with a slow, deliberate grace across the vast expanse of ice, its engine a deep, steady growl. Its single operator, a faceless silhouette behind the glass, seemed oblivious to me, to everything. Why was I here? The rumble of its engine began to morph, deepening, shifting into a sound that was both mechanical and organic, a guttural purr that resonated with the hum still thrumming in my bones. This wasn't a memory, not truly. This was a twisted reflection, a stage set for a performance I didn't understand. I saw myself, younger, standing at the edge of this very rink, watching a figure skate with effortless grace. A woman, her laughter, bright and clear, echoed in the vast space, even though no sound truly escaped my lips. The entity was showing me what it craved, the raw, exposed nerve of my grief. It wanted me to drown in it. The Zamboni completed its circuit, its engine winding down with a final, shuddering sigh. She raised a hand, beckoning. It would be so easy. Just let go. It said, I am alone. I always have been. Give in. But something shifted. The image of the woman, once a beacon of lost happiness, now felt like a trap. The entity wasn't offering solace. It was offering oblivion, a complete erasure. A flicker of defiance, small but stubborn, ignited deep within me. I remembered the ledger, the warnings, the faces of those who had come before. They had given in. I wouldn't. The numbness was a lie. This empty rink, this twisted memory was a lie. I pushed back, a desperate, internal heave. I focused on the rough texture of the floorboards I had been on, the metallic tang of fear that coated my tongue. I wouldn't let it take this memory, this place, and twist it into another weapon against me. My body still felt leaden, but a spark of warmth, a tiny ember of anger, began to spread from my chest. I clenched my fists, feeling the phantom splinters of wood against my palm. The ice cracked. I was fighting, truly fighting for the first time. My head throbbed, my chest ached. But the numbness was retreating, replaced by a searing pain, a sharp, undeniable proof of my own existence. Could I hold onto this fragile defiance? I remembered the faces. Not the woman's face, not the entity's false comfort, but the faded photographs in the ledger. The previous victims. Their eyes, haunted, desperate, yet in some, a flicker of something else. Defiance. That spark had finally ignited deep within me. The entity wasn't offering peace. It was offering erasure. Oblivion. I wouldn't take it. The house still pressed in, a cold, heavy weight. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the grimy windows, but the shadows clung, thick and possessive. My breath plumed in the stale air. A metallic tang, like old blood and rust, coated my tongue. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. I had spent too long letting it whisper to me, letting it feed. Now, I would starve it. I didn't know how, not precisely, but I wouldn't give in. I would not be another face in the ledger. My vision blurred at the edges, the familiar peeling wallpaper twisting into patterns I didn't recognize, then dissolving. The scent of decay intensified, then shifted, replaced by something sharper, cleaner, almost sterile. A hum, low and resonant, vibrated through the floorboards, through my very bones. It wasn't the house settling. It was a machine. The walls around me stretched, widened, the ceiling soaring upward until it was lost in a hazy gloom. The floor beneath my feet lost its gritty texture, becoming smooth, impassably slick. I stumbled, catching myself, my hands scraping against a sudden, unforgiving surface. Concrete. My eyes struggled to adjust, but the light was diffuse, indirect, filtering down from unseen fixtures high above. I stood on the edge of an ice rink, Zamboni running. Season hasn't started. The words formed in my mind, stark and undeniable, even as my surroundings screamed impassability. A vast expanse of pristine, milky white ice stretched before me, reflecting the vague overhead glow like a distorted mirror. The air here was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, making my ears ache. I could see my breath, thick white clouds puffing out with every gasp. The Zamboni, a lumbering, green behemoth, moved slowly across the far end of the rink, its engine a deep, throbbing growl that resonated through the cavernous space. The rhythmic scrape of its blade against the ice was a constant, unsettling counterpoint to the engine's hum. It left behind a glassy, perfect surface, erasing any imperfections, any trace of what might have been there before. The smell of ammonia, sharp and clean, mingled with the faint, sweet scent of newly planed ice. No crowds, no cheers. Why here? Why this? Lonely. Lost. I saw her then, the woman from the photographs, shimmering on the ice, her smile soft, her eyes full of the love I craved. She glided towards me, her form wavering like heat haze. Come, rest, it's over. My heart seized, my breath caught in my throat. I could almost feel the warmth of her hand, the ghost of her touch, but the ledger, the faces, the oblivion. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. This was the entity's trap, its final, most insidious play. It wanted me to surrender to the phantom of my past, to embrace the sorrow. My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. I forced my gaze away from the shimmering illusion, forcing myself to focus on the relentless, indifferent churn of the Zamboni, its steady progress an anchor in the swirling chaos. The woman's form flickered, her smile twisting into something predatory. My chest tightened, a crushing weight. My legs felt like lead, heavy, refusing to move, but I remembered the ledger. I remembered the words etched in faded ink, the warnings from those who had come before. It fed on despair, on loneliness, on grief. It didn't want my defiance. It wanted my surrender, my acceptance. If I didn't give it to it, what then? Could it truly force me? I pushed back, not with strength, but with a fierce, burning refusal. You won't have me. The words didn't leave my lips, but they screamed through my mind, defiant shout against the entity's insidious assault. I pictured the faces, not as victims, but as warnings, as beacons of what not to become. The air crackled. The woman's illusion shattered like glass, dissolving into mist. The ice beneath my feet began to groan, a low, ominous sound. Then spiderweb cracks spread rapidly from where I stood, racing across the pristine surface. The entire space seemed to buckle, the concrete walls rippling, the high ceiling twisting like paper. The metallic tang faded, leaving behind the musty scent of ancient wood and dust. The illusion was breaking. The entity was retreating, starved, weakened. I had refused its feast. I had denied it my soul. My muscles trembled, exhausted, but a profound, weary sense of triumph settled over me. I had survived. I had fought it. The house reformed around me, silent once more. The vast, empty rink was gone, replaced by the sagging walls of the main hall, the tarnished portraits of forgotten ancestors staring down with empty eyes. The dust motes still danced in the weak sunlight, different, lighter, the phantom touches, the blurring edges of reality. I stood there, trembling, my body aching, my mind reeling, but I had refused. I had fought back. I had won for now.